Okay, so this is the astrology for the gentleman Paddock and the Las Vegas shooting. And again, this is specifically to go over the chart and to look for indicators of mass murders and major tragedies, which will not show up in this chart. So let's go through his chart and let's look at who we're dealing with. So the first thing that we're looking at, so you know we don't have a time of birth, so disregard the house placements. So all of these positions in the chart mean absolutely nothing without a time of birth. We're using a 0 Aries rising. So all we're using at this point are planets and signs and their aspects for information. So the first thing that I want to draw your attention to is the Sun-Venus conjunction in Aries opposing Saturn and Neptune in Libra. Right here across the chart, and you'll notice also that Venus is retrograde. So this gives us some pieces of information that are noteworthy. And also, because Saturn-Neptune conjunct in Libra is a generational influence, there are some generational things that have to be taken into account when we look at the psycho profile of this particular individual. So with the Sun in Aries, the Sun is exalted in Aries. This is somebody who feels very at home with Aryan or martial type activities. So it's not unthinkable that he would be very comfortable or be an enthusiast for things militant, such as firearms and survivalist sort of things and all that stuff that goes with very Martian behavior. Now, with that, he has Venus retrograde in Aries, and Venus in Aries tends to be extremely competitive and also very insecure about their value to other people and in relationships. So typically people with Venus in Aries are extremely competitive with everyone and everything. They want to be the first, the best, the fastest, the ultimate at everything, which can be kind of annoying if you're not a competitive person, but those of you who enjoy that sort of thing will probably get on well with Venus in Aries. Now, the challenge, of course, is that with Venus in Aries retrograde, anytime you have Venus retrograde, you have somebody who's extremely vulnerable to criticisms and hurts and rejection. They're already in a weakened position because of the retrograde position. So all of their insecurities, all of their self-doubt, all of the things that make them feel like they have to be better than everybody else to prove their worth is even more magnified with this particular position. So any injury to their self-esteem or their identity will be 10 times worse than it would be for other people. With a male chart with a Sun Venus in Aries like this also typically indicates somebody who has a much more, I don't want to say primitive, but more primal, old-fashioned, me Tarzan, you Jane sort of idealism about relationships. So he measures himself and his manhood by the definition of masculine terms that he understands, which tend to be very heavy on the macho. Women with this placement will typically gravitate towards men who are the embodiment of those things, who are very heavy on the macho, very muscle, guns, shoot out at the OK Corral kind of mentalities. And this doesn't make it bad. This is not a value judgment. This is just an observation. Everybody's got their thing that works for them. And with Aries, heavy Aries placements, these people typically are looking for the archetype of a hero or a warrior, either to be that person or to support that person. So in a male chart, in this particular case, we have somebody whose identity is wrapped around the image of the Marlboro Man, cowboy, warrior, Apache, military vet sort of thing, which may or may not be easy to deal with. It could prove to be problematic. Now, one of the other things that you're going to see is that his Sun in Aries is squaring Uranus in Cancer. So Sun-Uranus Sun-Uranus square in and of itself tends to make a person more prone to irritable outbursts that are completely unpredictable and extremely difficult to manage. He would have had a real issue with not authority figures, but just people in general telling him what to do, because he, again, competitive, macho, the big man on campus, he's got to be number one. And people who are leaders generally have a difficult time taking orders from people they see as their inferior. Whether they're actually inferior or not has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with their perception of this person as being inferior, which is why they're very competitive. You constantly have to prove yourself better than they are. So with a Sun-Uranus square like this would have been difficult. He would have been difficult at best. He would have been hyper competitive, and also he would have had some unusual ideas about what his home life and what his expectations from people in his home domestically would have been. So what we do know is he's been married twice, which in this country is not unusual. That's hardly a big red flag if there's something wrong with someone. But the ex-wives would probably, if their stories are consistent with each other, would be able to tell us a little bit more about the personality we're dealing with, and we may find that he was extremely difficult to live with. And also with a Sun-Venus conjunction squaring Uranus, the Sun-Venus conjunction makes a very tight opposition to Saturn and Neptune. So what I would have expected to also hear from the ex-wives, and maybe the ex-girlfriend, but most definitely ex-wives who've been there, done that, and left him, is that he was probably an extremely controlling personality who had very fixed ideas, whether they were based in reality or not, and had a very, very difficult time dealing with challenges to his perception of reality. So he's one of those people that when he's wrong, he doesn't know he's wrong, and he doesn't take someone offering him suggestion that he's wrong as a helpful criticism. He sees this as an attack on his entire identity and his sense of reality. So that can be problematic. I know a lot of people from this generation that carry similar aspects with either Venus or the Sun, and that Saturn Neptune in opposition to it, and that one particular quirk is very specific to that generation. Now, with that said, what this also means, and the thing to understand is that as we get older, sentiment becomes stronger. So when we look backward in time, everything always looks better. This is why no matter what age group you're talking to, they're always going to tell you that their time period that they grew up in was so much better than it is right now. They totally, well, not they, we all totally forget all the bad stuff that happened until we got here. So it's kind of like dealing with exes, ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, ex-husbands. There is that moment when sentiment takes over and we forget all the reasons that we left them until we have to live through it again. And then we realize, oh, right, that's why I didn't want to be here anymore. So sentiment runs very, very strong in all of us. The problem is with this particular combination of aspects, with Venus retrograde in Aries and opposing Saturn and Neptune in Libra, the sense of sentiment may be distorted and very fixed. Again, he doesn't like having his perception of reality challenged. So whatever his imagination of what the past was and all of its, glorious edited versions, leaving out all the bad stuff that he's conveniently forgetting, that's what he's going to hang on to. And you are not going to tell him any differently. And if you do, it's going to be seen as a very much an attack on him. He will take that very personally. So that would be challenging at best. The other thing is moving on with this. So right here, we're not looking at anything that indicates somebody who could potentially become a mass murderer. I mean, in very general terms, we could probably make a lot of associations, but that's not fair, and it's not accurate, and that's not the way these things are done if you're trying to actually accomplish anything. Because there are many people running around with similar aspects that are not going to go out and shoot up concerts full of strangers. That is a very specific type of act, and it takes a tremendous amount of brokenness inside somebody to want to go hurt large, or even a single individual, but much less a large number of people that they don't know personally. So don't confuse the two, and understand that these are not aspects so far that we're describing that would indicate any potential for mass murder. And any astrologer that tells you otherwise is a charlatan and a fool, and I will tell them to their face personally. That's a very dangerous statement to make using just aspects like this. Okay, so now some people might look at his Mercury in Pisces and say, oh, well, it's clearly a sign of delusion. No, it's not. So Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, is typically associated with delusions and fantasies and all sorts of mystical, hard to pin down things that are not based on objective reality as we experience it. But one of the interesting things about Mercury in Pisces is that Mercury in Pisces tends to make people extremely mathematically inclined, and math is a very hyper-rational science that has absolute answers. So it either is or is not correct. There is no gray area or playing with fantastical imaginings of what something might be. It's absolute. People with Mercury and Pisces typically are extremely good with numbers and often gravitate to the sciences or the things that are very heavy in math, which is an interesting sort of thing that comes up. And you'll also find that Mercury in Pisces tends to be the exact opposite of what we expect with Pisces. So Mercury in Pisces singularly tends to be more hyper-rational, which is kind of interesting. But again, when you're dealing with hyper-rational people, you're also dealing with people who don't like having their perceptions challenged because they're very, very anal about getting their facts right and getting their details down. So they don't. It just doesn't occur to them. They could be wrong, and anything that challenges that or potentially upsets that and makes them wrong is very destabilizing. So that also contributes to this difficulty in getting this man to see things a different way than the way he wants to see them and is going to see them, and that's it. By God and gumption. So Mercury now makes a yod, or well, it's kind of wide, but it's a two quincunxes. One is to Saturn and Neptune, and the other is Pluto and Leo. These are both generational sets of planets. So one of the things that's happening is with a personal planet like Mercury involved in an aspect like this with generational planets, there's something about him or his Mercury that becomes the voice of a generation. So there's something specific and unique to him that allows him to be the flashpoint for a generational issue. And as I had said in the other video, one of the big challenges that we're facing and that we can look forward to more of are people in the baby boomer generation, and especially these old white guys with tons and tons of guns, who are going to lose their crap and do all sorts of like bizarre things, unfortunately involving guns, because that's the way people do things in this country. So we can expect to see more of that. But there's, and all of this has to do with Congress and the attack on Social Security and Medicare. I keep getting that mixed up. So we're not going to get into politics, but for those of you who are familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who aren't quite sure what I'm saying, it would be good to go back and look at the fight with the AARP and Congress, because the AARP represents the baby boomers, and they are very much up in arms about the things that Congress has been attempting to do for the last 15 years, since I think before the Obama administration. I think it started with the Bush administration. But definitely with this Congress. Good Lord, what a bunch of selfish monkeys. So the senior citizens are really under the gun, but the difference is that this particular generation, baby boomers, they will fight back. They're not going to lay down and take it. So things will get colorful if we don't start making things better. And he is literally just the tip of the iceberg. He's the tipping point. So Mercury in conjunct Saturn and Neptune in Libra. So one of the things that we can expect with that, again, issues with rigidity in thinking. I'm not going to say reality, because reality is so subjective. There's a rigidity in thinking, and there is a difficulty in feeling completely secure in the information you do have. So there's some paranoia that might be present here, but a lot of this has more to do with self-doubt and doubting other people and not really trusting information as a general thing, and seeing oneself as the only authority on things, with an absolute refusal to consider that one might be wrong. So in and of itself, that by alone makes it not a great combination if somebody's not in the best mindset. Mercury quincunx Pluto, again, extreme rigidity in thinking and a refusal to bend. And also with Mercury quincunx Pluto, one of the things that you're going to find is that almost paranoid distrust of information as a general thing. And this would not have been something that happened later in life with all of the stupid alt facts, alt fiction, alt news, alt president nonsense. This would have been something that he would have been he would have carried with him from very early childhood, this distrust of information people give him, probably because there was a lot of manipulation and a lot of misuse of information when he was very young. So you got to see up close and personal how people took information and distorted it and then fed it for their own agendas, which makes him very suspicious of everything. With Mercury, Pluto in conjunct, what you will also get is somebody who is an extremely deep thinker. Because they don't trust information, they will dig deeper to find the actual truth and all the information that's being left out. And it's also somebody who's very good at manipulation. So with Mercury, Pluto in conjunct, what you'll find is that once this person gets to a place where they can trust themselves in their own research, and has a better sense of how to deal with or navigate situations and people around them without making them uncomfortable. What will also happen is that they will be very, very gifted at manipulating people, because they'll know they'll identify weak spots faster than other people. So the thing with quincunxes that you're going to find in the chart is quincunx is a source of irritation, and they're also a blind spot. It's where you can't see things for yourself, and everybody's got their blind spots. So with him, his blind spots have a lot to do because Saturn, Neptune, and Libra have a lot to do with relationships. He's women, his intimate, well, assuming he's heterosexual, his intimate relationships would be his blind spot. He's very idealistic when it comes to relationships. He has very, very high romantic ideas about women and who women are and what they're supposed to be. And again, he has his own ideas. He doesn't like being challenged on that. So when women or his partners expose themselves as having feet of clay, as opposed to being this divine marble statue that you can worship, that's when the trouble sets in. Mercury quincunx Pluto also means that one of his other blind spots would be with children and with teenagers. So he may have had, like so many old men, he may have had an unfortunate fixation on younger women, which in this particular case really would have been a huge Achilles heel. He would have had a huge blind spot where they're concerned, and that would have been detrimental in a lot of ways. But, some people don't learn until they go through it over and over and over again. So what are you going to do, right? Okay. And again, it's a generational thing, the whole baby boomer generation, we're never going to grow old, perpetual youth, all this sort of stuff. All the cultural things that go with that generation could be part of this. And again, he is the flashpoint for a generation of people and the culture and ideologies that they bring with them. And also their issues. So again, Mercury in this particular chart shows us where some of the issues are, but again, it's not showing us somebody who's capable of shooting up an entire concert full of strangers. So we have the moon in Aquarius. Now, without time of birth, we don't actually know where the moon is. What we do know is that the moon is somewhere between 15 and 29 degrees Aquarius. So it's in the mid to late degrees of Aquarius, which means that it could theoretically either be square Mars or it could be involved in a T-square with Jupiter and Pluto. One of the things that we do know about this man is that he had money, and he apparently won it gambling, I think, or something like that, but he was very financially comfortable. So I would venture to say with this particular chart that that moon is probably later and in a T-square of Jupiter and Pluto and not in a square to the moon. So a moon square Pluto would give us somebody who's very hot-tempered and very stubborn and holds grudges. But that's not enough. Sun Uranus is going to make us hot-tempered. Mars and Taurus is going to have us hold grudges too. So that's not enough. That's not enough information, and it's kind of redundant. And the other thing is it doesn't explain the finances. So, significant amounts of money, especially windfalls of money in his lifetime. Apparently he came into the money. He didn't necessarily earn it from his job. Would definitely be shown with the T-square, with Moon, Jupiter, and Pluto. So I'm going to go with the moon at a later degree of Aquarius. Moon in Aquarius tends to be much more emotionally independent. They need a lot more emotional space. They're happier in their head. They're not really big touchy-feely people. And with male charts, the moon in Aquarius tends to attract women who are more independent and are less needy, as it were, which flies completely in the face of the rest of the chart, which has this very old-fashioned, I am man, I am Tarzan, you woman, follow me sort of theme to it. So there could have been some conflict there. We have Mars in Taurus, which would make him very stubborn. Oh my God, so stubborn. And it would be squaring Pluto in Leo, which would also make him extremely controlling. So he must have been a pit to live with. But this, again, doesn't necessarily doesn't necessarily give us absolute signs of violence at this level or extreme. One of the interesting things to notice with Mars in Taurus, this is typically a placement that emphasizes or brings to the forefront a propensity or a pleasure in collecting things. So like many gun enthusiasts, it's not unexpected with Mars and Taurus that if he found pleasure in guns, which he would, it's very militant, that he would have an arsenal. But I don't know that we can necessarily use Mars and Taurus as an indication that somebody would have an entire arsenal of weapons in their home, only because I know a lot of gun enthusiasts, and they all seem to think that having a small arsenal in their house is normal. Yeah, I don't know what that's about either. Yeah, I just, Jesus. Anyway, so so there's that, and this is the chart. Now, if we go over to his midpoints, right? So we're saying, well, okay, well maybe there's something in his midpoints showing here. Maybe there's something we're missing, and no, there's not. Um, he has the sun on a Mercury Mars midpoint. We left out any midpoints involving the moon because we don't actually know where the moon is. Um, So the sun is on a Mercury Mars midpoint, which again further emphasizes this very macho thinking, this very masculine perception of the world, this very male dominant view of how things are supposed to be and get done. Um, Almost too much so. So the thing about it is when you have aspects like this, if you have an outlet for them, you can function in a healthy manner and be non-toxic and be productive and be peaceful and be productive and good for society. When you don't have healthy outlets for aspects, they'll still manifest, but they're going to manifest in whatever outlets you allow it, which may not necessarily be the best ones. So with Mercury, Mars, and the sun together, sun, Mercury, Mars, what we have is somebody who would be very, again, competitive, and also need physical activity and also challenges, need mental challenges. They need things to push against, to prove themselves with. This would have made somebody who would have been a phenomenal instructor in more martial activities. Um, but without these outlets, he would just have been combative and abusive and argumentative and all the things that we don't like when we think of Sun, Mercury, Mars, and Aries, or Sun, Mercury, Mars together. Very opinionated, very egocentric, very aggressive in his speech, very hot-headed, pig-headed, sort of thing. So that's not really helping us. One of the things that's interesting, however, is that his natal Mercury is opposing the midpoints for Saturn, Pluto, and Neptune, Pluto. So we've got this whole Saturn, Neptune, Pluto thing going on, and his natal Mercury sits right there at that degree. So, and remember, we talked about that Saturn, Neptune, and having very specific ideas and fantasies about how the world is supposed to be, and very, very fixed in their sentiment to the point that they refuse to recognize when they're editing their version of history to suit themselves. With Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto together and his natal Mercury on those degrees, this also can do one of two things. We can either have somebody who is a visionary, who has a tremendous amount of long range vision, oh my God, who is the guy who does Apple? I'm so bad at this stuff. Or like Bill Gates, like they have the ability to see into the future and have a very clear vision of how things could be and what needs to happen to get there. Or you could have somebody who is so rigid and locked into their ideas about how the world is, they literally manicure their entire world, reality, and environment in such a way that there's practically no fresh air that ever gets in, because it's literally everything's on lockdown. So everything that comes in is filtered. Everything that's allowed to exist in the world is filtered. Everything is manicured to such a point that it's almost like Disneyland. So there's this artificial reality that's created around them that is extremely structured and extremely rigid and non-compromising, and nothing gets in that's going to disrupt that, and nothing leaves that's going to destabilize that. So that's the other way that this could have manifested. And my guess is in this particular instance that it was the latter that we were looking at. Now, what is interesting is that at the time of the shooting, Saturn is angular in this chart. So this is the time of the shooting. And Saturn, by transit, was squaring his natal Mercury and squaring that Saturn, Neptune, Pluto midpoint. So it was making a T-square to these very sensitive points or parts of his chart. So there should be, as time goes on, we should be getting a lot of information about some sort of, what is the term I'm looking for, disappointment or disaffection, or feeling like they're separated or isolated or abandoned, feeling like they've been abandoned and thrown away, is usually what you get with Saturn, Neptune, Pluto by society. So I don't I'm surprised we didn't see some kind of diary or manifesto. Maybe that's coming and we just haven't found it yet. Um, but it's there. So, the only other thing I would say is that with this particular incident, obviously this was calculated. You don't just suddenly wake up one morning and decide you're going to go shoot people, from a 36th floor window, into a crowd, and walking into a hotel with 7 rifles in your suitcase. Like that just doesn't happen because you're having a bad morning. So in order for him to have done this was extremely calculated. It was well thought out. It was well planned. This man knew exactly what he was doing, and he acted with a precision that we would expect from a Virgo. And of course, we don't see any Virgo in his chart or anything like that. So one of the things that I would say is that looking at this is the event chart. No, this is his chart. One of the things that I would say is we would also want to look back. So remember we were talking about Pluto and Leo. So this whole generation, these baby boomers, specifically the ones with Pluto and Leo. Now the baby boomer generation, in case you guys don't know, breaks up into 2 parts because apparently it's now also inclusive of people who are born with Pluto and Virgo following them. But our primary concern, and he fits the generation with Pluto and Leo, is the Pluto and Leo generation. Pluto and Virgo generation is a whole other set of issues. And by the way, for you younger folks listening to this, don't kid yourself. You're just as jacked up as the rest of us, and your Pluto brings its own set of problems, which we'll get into in other chart work. Hopefully you won't be blowing things up. Okay, so the Pluto and Leo generation, one of the things to notice is that with the eclipse patterns that we've had over the last couple of years, and this is going to continue on until 2019, okay, is that we are having nothing but Aquarius and Leo eclipses, like over and over and over and over again. So every person born in this generation with Pluto and Leo is getting banged around by these eclipses. So one of the things that I would expect to see, and I said this before, is that the baby boomers are going to be the most dangerous population that we have because they do pay attention. They are politically active. They know what's going on. And more importantly, they've got nothing left to lose now. So there's nothing more dangerous than somebody who's paying attention and has nothing left to lose. And you have a whole bunch of old people that are literally at the end of the rope in Congress coming after the things that make it almost impossible for them to live out their lives in any kind of peace of mind or comfort. And remember, with this generation, we've got this, a lot of them have this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So their sense of sentiment and their fantasies about what history used to be like, back in my day, is very, very fixed and rigid and uncompromising, even if it's not true. So they're longing for a world that never actually existed, maybe stronger than any affection they have for the current reality that they're dealing with. And that's going to be a problem. So he took this particular eclipse. The closest one we have prior to this was back in February, and that's a 22-degree Leo eclipse. So we're not really, we're seeing that, but I don't know that that's enough. One of the other things that's closer was a 15-degree Aquarius eclipse and a 28-degree Leo eclipse. Now the 15 or the 28, either of these could have hit his natal moon, and that could have been what set this off. But I would look at, ignore these degrees, we don't actually know where the moon is. With that Pluto at 20 Leo, making this potential T-square in his chart, what I would look for is going back to February of this year to see what was going on in his life and to see what would have been triggered. And more specifically, he took an eclipse almost dead on his Mercury, which is also being activated by Saturn in transit when the shooting occurred. This occurred back in September of 2016. So all of these events that we're looking at right now, I would venture that the real root of this started back around February of last year. So this is something that's been building for over a year, which makes perfect sense because this was unbelievably carefully executed. This was not a spontaneous sort of, oh, I think I'll go shoot up a concert now. All right. So far we've seen absolutely nothing here that indicates that somebody could become a mass shooter. So if people tell you otherwise or whatever, like just, oh my God, just grain of salt and walk away. If you have somebody who, just so you guys know, if you don't have any experience in mental health fields, the thing to understand is that when you have somebody who is broken or is broken in places, okay, anytime there's stress applied to something that's broken, the break gets worse. Okay, and the challenge, of course, is that when you have people who are broken in places that we can't see on the surface, it's very easy to accidentally or intentionally inflict a lot of additional unnecessary stress and pressure to make these things worse for them. And right now, we have had a lot of funding to mental health programs cut. So we've got a lot of people who need more mental health support to deal with these stressful times to keep them from breaking further, that are not getting the support that they need. Not to mention, there's still a huge stigma around mental health that needs to be addressed. So when we look at charts, we're not looking at, the giant witch hunt about who's going to be the potential next mass murderer. What we're looking at is where are the stress points in someone's chart and where did this start and how could we prevent this happening in someone else again. And all of this goes down to mental health, and being supportive and having better support systems for people, because people are wildly fragile. Do not kid yourself. So if you're going through life pretty easy peasy squeezy breezy and all good and you don't really have these issues, it's because your life is pretty insular and you don't really have a lot of challenges to the way you're living your life. It doesn't mean that you're stronger. It just means that you're lucky. Okay? All right. So so we're going to finish this out here. And the thing that I just want to draw your attention to is as we move forward, right here, when we finish out the Leo Aquarius eclipses, we're then moving into Cancer Capricorn eclipses. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Cancer and Capricorn, that's not going to bother that Pluto and Leo at all. No, it's not. However, it will set up squares to that Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we're seeing in his chart as part of his generation. So again, this whole baby boomer generation close to his age is getting banged about by these eclipses really hard, starting from 2016 well into 2019. And because once we finish Leo Aquarius eclipses, we're going right into Cancer Capricorn, and that's going to set off that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is going to be even more messy. So be prepared for some really interesting times. And